Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Pan Future Podcast. I'm your host, Sean, and today is Saturday, September 23rd, 2017. I realized after I did the show last week and posted it that I totally forgot to do any sort of quote, which is a thing that I meant to do on a more semi-regular basis. And so here's a quote for this week, so I don't forget again. We'll get to it right away. People can foresee the future only when it coincides with their own wishes, and the most grossly obvious facts can be ignored when they are unwelcome. From George Orwell. Yes, Orwell, who was writing fiction, not how-to manuals, a certain tidbit fact that needs to be expressed more clearly to some of our leaders. Anyway, also as per the talk last week, we're continuing with the new show format. So this week's show is an all-news show. So let's get right to all the news. First item in the news this week, maybe you've already seen it, maybe not. The Google Doodle for today is for Asima Chatterjee, an Indian chemist. Today would be her 100th birthday. She died in 2006, but was born in 1917 in Kolkata, India. And she was an organic chemist noted for her work in the fields of organic chemistry and phytomedicine. Her most notable work includes research on vinca alkaloids and the development of anti-epileptic drugs and anti-malarial drugs. And just a note here, organic means anything with carbon. Doesn't mean what it means when you buy some overpriced crap at Whole Foods. Organic.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Means there's carbon. All right, so 100th anniversary of the birth of a wonderful scientist. Moving on now to something near and dear to my own heart, guitar strings. In a story from phys.org, revolutionary guitar string rocks the guitar world. A guitar string developed at the University of St. Andrews has struck a chord, with some of the greats of the music world. The invention by Dr. Jonathan Kemp, head of music technology at the Music Center, who also lectures in the School of Physics and Astronomy, allows electric guitar strings to be balanced in sensitivity and feel in a way that has never been achieved before. Some famous players showing interest in this: Guthrie Govan, David Torn, Paul Masvidal, and Peter Malandrone, technician to Queen guitarist Brian May. All those guys are famous to me, probably except for maybe Brian May. They don't mean anything to the rest of you, but this is a real thing. So in a nutshell, without needing to understand how to play guitar, guitar players use vibrato arms or their fingers to bend strings, to bend the pitch of a note. And because of the different thicknesses and tensions of the strings, the distance you bend to achieve a certain pitch change is different for every single string on your guitar. These new strings, if I'm understanding this right, evens out that feel. At least the most significant variations are on the lower four strings of the guitar. So across those strings, what is in standard tuning a G, D, A, and E, if you bend these new strings a certain distance, the pitch change on each of these different sized strings is the same. There's not a whole lot of detail about how this is achieved here or how durable these are or anything like that, but this is really kind of a cool breakthrough. What this would also mean is that you could use a vibrato arm to bend entire chords, and they would stay in tune as you bend them, which is fascinating. Something similar was achieved by designed by Ned Steinberger back in the 80s with a very special balanced tremolo arm system. It was fairly complicated and sometimes didn't work, and not a lot of people used it. But if the strings could be changed, that's really interesting. And I like stories like this too, not only because I'm a guitar player and it's something I'm interested in, but string technology is largely unchanged for decades. New materials have been used. They've tried different shapes for the strings that have a wrap on them instead of being round. There's a hex core. But there's not a lot different between strings now and strings in the 70s or strings in the 50s or, nylon strings or gut strings for classical guitars have changed a little bit over the years, and every now and then there's a composite material or something, but nothing that's been a wholesale change of how the string might actually function on the instrument. So new things that change a very old technology are really interesting. So if you play guitar, keep your ears open for this. I think there's a YouTube video here that I can link to so you can check out how these actually sound too. I checked out the video this morning, and it sounds really good. That's one of the important things too about changing an old technology is to make sure you don't totally screw up what was working before. The tone is it's pretty thick tone that the guy in the video is using to demonstrate it, but it sounds very appropriate for electric guitar. So I don't think it's, like sticking rubber bands on it or something like that. Check out the video. Sounds good. In medical news this week, scientists in the UK have edited a human embryo and gotten some interesting results. And this, right up front, I want to say the UK has some new, very specific rules about working with human embryos because people get very touchy about this subject, understandably so. These embryos, single-cell embryos, only single-cell embryos, are leftovers from fertilization treatments that were donated by the couples undergoing the treatments, for one thing. And basically, the editing was done, they saw what happened, and then the embryos were destroyed. So we're not growing superhumans yet. But using a CRISPR technology, they switched off a protein called OCT4. Now, in work with mice, they did this, and the mouse embryos formed placental cells and not much else and didn't develop. In the human embryos, however, the placental cells also failed to form, which is an indication that OCT4 is a vital component in the development of placental cells and the fetal cells. One of the main aims of this particular research is to offer some other fertility treatments in the future, because sometimes in vitro fertilization, that sort of thing, doesn't even hold for people. So CRISPR doing some work on some human medical problems, and I think being handled in a respectable and acceptable way, I hope, for most people. I'm sure some people out there would oppose this sort of thing no matter what, but I don't. Science is good. Science is just a tool. It depends on how you use it. And frankly, somebody's going to do it. All this CRISPR stuff, it could be banned in the United States. That China's going to do it. South Korea's going to do it. Russia's going to do it. It's inevitable in some ways, but I think more stories like this points people in saying, hey, it is just a tool, and we can regulate it, and we can use it to help people. Speaking of other countries that are going to do things, whether your own country does it or not, this from Science Magazine. Russia heightens defenses against climate change. Yes, even Russia knows that climate change is a real thing. They've had a lot of problems recently, clearly, particularly things like wildfires making weather and living conditions really bad there, especially near Moscow. In that region, home to 20 million people, they estimate that climate-related economic damage will reach $4.3 billion a year by 2025. Now, in and amongst this other information, they're also looking at widespread forest fires, 4.6 million hectares in Siberia, flooding in the Far East, West Nile virus making more inroads into Russia, along with tick-borne encephalitis and Lyme disease. And these are largely spreading faster and being worse due to climate change. Now, Russia is enacting policies and studying ways to adapt to this. They're looking at areas that are vulnerable to climate change, recommending adaptation measures, and estimating compliance costs. They are also, in their plan, lauding the resilience that it sees in its cities' power grids, housing complexes, and transportation networks. So they are patting their backs on that, but also trying to measure the possibility that many, many millions of people could be killed or made sick by air quality issues and things like that. However, what's not present in this plan is any desire to reduce carbon emissions. So I don't know if it's sort of the dour Russian attitude toward things, or if it's just, we're not going to do anything to shrink our economy or anything like that. But Russia is apparently preparing for things to be terrible, while not actually attempting to make it better. They're just going to be ready for when things are worse. So half good, I guess. Some materials science news this week. A team of researchers from HRL Laboratories have devised a method that allows for the 3D printing of high-strength metals and alloys. Commonly used in heavy-duty industrial parts, they can now be manufactured faster and cheaper than ever before. Now, for a long time, working with metal has been difficult and costly, especially high-strength alloys like aluminum alloys. They're difficult to work with in 3D printing or additive manufacturing processes because they have to be broken down into small bits and then added back up. HRL Laboratories have developed a new method that allows them to 3D print high-strength aluminum and weld what was previously an unweldable material. As described by Hunter Martin, a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and engineer at HRL's Sensors and Materials Laboratory, he said, "We're using a 70-year-old nucleation theory to solve a 100-year-old problem with a 21st century machine." Now, they have come up with a method they've called nanofunctionalization, where these nanofunctionalized powders, whatever that is, that's breaking it down into little powdery bits, are fed into a 3D printer. This is then applied in thin layers which are heated by laser to solidify into a three-dimensional object. During the melting and solidification, structures are produced using this method that won't crack and are able to maintain their full alloy strength, thanks to the nanoparticles acting as nucleation sites for the intended alloy microstructure. So it's similar to the way some 3D printing has been done, but it's being done with a material that they haven't been able to work with this way before. This really opens up a lot of potential areas in space manufacturing to work with metals, high strength metals in a 3D printed setting is really a breakthrough, and I hope to keep an eye on this, and I'd like to see how widespread this would become. And now, it came from outer space. First item on the docket for space news this week: Osiris Rex, NASA's asteroid chasing project, zipped by the Earth on Friday using our planet's gravity to pick up speed on its way to explore an asteroid. This flyby was about 11,000 miles above Antarctica, and the spacecraft will be traveling now 8,451 miles per hour, or 3.778 kilometers per second. The Earth Gravity Assist is a clever way to move spacecraft into Bennu's orbital plane using Earth's own gravity instead of expending fuel, the mission principal investigator Dante Loretta said in a statement. Also during the flyby, the mission scientists at University of Arizona tested its instruments and used the craft's camera to take pictures of the Earth and Moon. Now, Osiris Rex is on its way out to an asteroid named Bennu. It is a very dark asteroid, and some people think that Bennu could be a threat to the Earth in the future. And Osiris Rex is not just going to go out there and study this asteroid. It is actually going to use its robot arm to blast the asteroid with some nitrogen, kick up some rocks and dust, and try to snag those samples and return them to Earth. It will arrive at the asteroid in August of 2018, do its studies for a while, and then in 2020, it will use the arm to try to snag some samples and return to Earth in 2023. So keep that in the back of your head. Osiris Rex will be reappearing in the news in the near future. Also in space news this week, a team of researchers with the Finnish Meteorological Institute have proposed a plan to explore up to 300 separate asteroids. Interesting that I ran across several asteroid stories this week. They're proposing a fleet of nanosatellites, 50 of them, to explore 300 separate asteroids. That would bring the cost down to a few $100,000 per asteroid, according to their presentation that they made at the European Planetary Science Congress. These small satellites could be launched in one vehicle and then separate from each other once launched. Or they could be used in extra spaces during other launches for other things. They would also plan to use a 20-kilometer-long wire to basically catch solar wind. And unlike a solar sail, which depends on the momentum of photons coming from the sun, these electric wire sails harvest the momentum of charged protons. They're still researching about whether this is an effective propulsion system, but an Estonian prototype satellite was launched in 2015 to test it, although its motor failed to reel out its tether. The Finnish also launched a satellite in June of 2017 called Aalto-1, which will test a prototype electric sail in this manner as well. So possibly taking a look at a lot of different asteroids. One of the things that's interesting about asteroids, and they may become essential for us in the future, is that some of them are nickel and iron, some are rock, some have water, some are more comet-like. just beyond the scientific fascination of these things, they may be an essential resource in building future space colonies or generation ships, or even having a place to live. A large enough hollowed out asteroid could be its own space station. So studying the asteroids are essential to our future in space. One last item to add to the news today. Although this happened a few months ago, it was not widely reported until recently. Stanislav Petrov died at the age of 77. Died back on May 19th. For some reason, the news didn't spread until now. If you don't know that name, Stanislav Petrov is the man who saved the world, quite literally. September 26, 1983, he was working a shift in the Soviet Union's air defense forces, and his job was to monitor the country's satellite system, looking for possible nuclear weapon launches from the United States. In the early morning hours of September 26, 1983, the alarms went off, indicating that the United States had launched 5 nuclear weapons. In recalling the event, he says he just sat there for a few seconds staring at it, and his duty would have been to just report it up the chain of command, and likely the Soviets would have launched a counterstrike. However, in his brief pause in this situation, he thought something just didn't seem right. Only 5 nuclear missiles seemed like too few for a full strike. And so he waited and examined the situation further, and came to discover he actually just sat there for 23 minutes. Now, it would only have taken about 20 minutes for the missiles to reach the Soviet Union, so he decided that he would check if there had been a computer malfunction, and there was. So, because he just had a gut feeling that it wasn't right, he saved the world from nuclear annihilation. This is 1983, height of the Cold War. This would have been, at that time, a nuclear war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union would have been utterly devastating. Probably dozens, if not hundreds, of missiles could have been launched. So, quite literally, Stanislav Petrov is the man who saved the world, and passed away at the age of 77. All right, there's the show. There's the all-news show. Lots of news for this week. Even a few things I didn't get to, I'll try to save them for next time. And, of course, as always, if you've stumbled on some interesting science or futurism news and you want to send it to me, I would love to hear about it. I am sure there are some sources that I don't always get to look at. And anyway, always looking for some cool stories to check out, so let me know. You can let me know by going to panfuture.org. You can use the contact page there. You can send email to me that way. From there, you can also find me on Twitter and Facebook. You could contact me there. While you're there, please consider the Patreon link to support the show. Also, other ways to support the show: share it with your friends and family, or write a review, especially on iTunes. If you get your podcast through iTunes, a review on iTunes really goes a long way to how iTunes ranks shows and does that sort of thing with it. So, after all that, again, thank you, as always, for joining me, and I will talk to you again in the future.